to finish up Kantian ethics, we'll take a look at his famous or infamous 3 postulates of morality. What Kant claims is this. He says there are 3 ideas that are unprovable and cannot be objects of knowledge, but we find them irresistible because they're the foundation of all morality. Now, Kant, when doing his work on metaphysics and other stuff, had this method of arguing where he would argue that if we have, say, an experience that requires a assumption or presumption of something, then we have to accept that presumption. Essentially, he's presenting a transcendent argument. And he also applies it here, the idea being that even though we can't prove these 3 things, specifically freedom, immortality, and God, we find them irresistible because we cannot have morality without them. So his argument essentially for them is this. You can't prove them, sure, but if you want morality, and you really, really do want morality, you've got to accept these. They are necessary conditions, he believes, for ethics, which could be seen as a good argument or perhaps not so good. So why do we need these for morality, and also why can't we prove them? Well, we'll address each question in turn. Let us begin with freedom. He claims that in order for morality to make sense, we need to be free. But we have no reason to believe that we are free. Here's why. If you look at the world scientifically, we supposedly cannot see freedom. Now, when Kant was doing his stuff, the dominant scientific view was that all events were determined by natural causes, and that human behavior can be analyzed in psychological and physiological terms. Now, today, of course, we have, this is quite a while after Kant. We're now in 2020. Science has advanced quite a bit, but the basic ideas still remain the same, namely that, everything is caused by natural causes. Our behavior can be analyzed in terms of psychology and physiological terms. And so looked at scientifically, we do not seem to have free will. It makes no sense. Even if you believe in like a random universe, that things happen by chance, that doesn't give freedom either, because if people's actions are determined by chance, they're still not free. They're just random. So Kant accepts that. Scientifically, of course, no evidence of this free will. Now, why then do we need freedom? Well, according to Kant, what we have to have is this. If there's something I ought to do, then this, according to Kant, implies that this is something that I can do. So only agents that are free can meet a requirement of morality. So we need to be free. Put another way, sort of generically, kind of a core assumption in ethics is, in order to be, say, morally responsible for something, it's got to be such that you have the choice. You could do otherwise. And we make this distinction in very practical ways in everyday life. For example, suppose you're driving and you hit a patch of like oil on the ground, and your car slips out of control and hits somebody else. In that case, there may be liability legally, but morally you're off the hook because there literally was nothing you could do. But if someone else is driving and they see a crowd of people they don't like and just step on the accelerator and drive into them, we think that it's wrong of them to do that because they could have done otherwise. They made a choice. And so one kind of key assumption in many ethical views is you have to be free to make the choice. Because if you're not, if it's all by chance or determined, it morally doesn't, has no relevance. To use another analogy, we don't hold machines morally accountable that don't have any, normal everyday machines. So if an industrial robot is doing its thing, and someone steps within like where its arm swinging and it kills them, we don't blame the industrial robot and say bad robot for killing that person. They can't do otherwise. They have no choice. So Kant thinks that we have to assume that there is a self beyond the empirical self. Now, in Kant's metaphysics, he draws a distinction between what he calls the noumenal and the phenomenal. Now, phenomenal in this case doesn't mean like really great or really awesome. It just means the world you experience, what you're experiencing now. And the noumenal world, in Kant's terms, is the reality behind that, beyond the phenomena. So there's how the world appears to us, like how it looks to our human senses. And there's how the world really is. Also, metaphysically, there's the reality behind the appearance. So Kant says empirically, the empirical self is not free, because science tells us it's all determined, or quantum mechanics, or physiological, so no freedom. So we need to believe in a noumenal self beyond the empirical self, and this is a free self. But as Kant notes, he accepts this freedom is unprovable, but it is a necessity for morality. We can't have ethics without it. So what's his argument as to why we need to accept it? Well, this is what he claims. Human life would be meaningless without morality, so we really want morality, so we must regard ourselves as free. Now, critics point out that this seems to be, an error in logic, because the mere fact, it's kind of the wicked consequence argument, that we have to accept something as true, because if we didn't, there would be like terrible results. People often use this in the context of religion, that you must believe in religion, because if religion wasn't true, then people would act terribly and everything, would be meaningless. But the obvious counter is the fact that things would be meaningless doesn't prove that things are meaningful. Maybe everything is, in fact, meaningless. But Kant, in a way, does make a good psychological argument that we want morality, so if we accept that we need freedom to have morality, then we got to accept freedom. Secondly, Kant says we must accept immortality. And his reasoning for this is kind of odd but consistent. So we saw earlier that morality, moral theories, moral principles, most philosophers accept you have to have essentially a practicality principle, that normal people in doing normal stuff can at least hit the level of not evil. Now, Kant says that the moral law is strict. We're obligated to not just be like not evil, but we must make our will conform perfectly with duty. We must achieve essentially perfect, morality. Now, obviously enough, you can't get perfection during life. So Kant says, but don't worry, I've got a solution. Because kind of the normal thing to say is, well, if you can't be perfect and morality needs to be like, have this practicality requirement, then you can't accept perfection. But Kant says, don't worry, I got this covered. He says immortality is thus a practical necessity. Why? Well, if you're going to achieve perfect morality, you would need endless time. Because, as Kant says, this infinite progress is possible, however, only on the presupposition of an infinitely enduring existence and personality of the same rational being. This is called the immortality of the soul. So we need immortality in a way for kind of a weird reason. Kant says you must achieve moral perfection. You obviously can't do this in one life, so you've got to be immortal. Now, as you might imagine, most moral philosophers do not require perfection, and so they generally wouldn't accept this. But Kant does have certainly an interesting workaround. His third postulate of morality is God. Now, the role of God in Kant's moral view is rather interesting. As we discussed earlier, There are some who accept divine command theory, that what is good because God commands it, and what is bad because God forbids it. Now, Kant rejects that, for reasons we saw before, the main ones in part being, if we're going to say that God is good, then we can't say that God is commanded by God, because that would be weird. Kant is also concerned about people's motivations, and this is common in many other ethical theories as well. Namely, you've got to have the right motive to be good. So, what if people are choosing to do good because they hope for eternal life? In other words, they just do good stuff because they want to go to heaven, and they're afraid of going to hell. Now, for some, that would seem to be fine. That's the reason why you do good and avoid doing bad, because of a hope for a payoff. And this could be like a divine payoff, or it could just be an everyday payoff, being good to get some rewards, avoiding being bad to avoid punishment. So Kant is very critical of this, because, he says, if someone is motivated by the rewards and punishments, they're not being good out of duty, but based on a calculation of interest. And for Kant, that would not be ethics. That would just be practicality. And Kant does seem pretty reasonable about this, because if I'm just doing stuff because I want to get paid, I want to get rewards, and I want to avoid punishment, I'm not really a good person. I'm just being practical. So if I'm not hurting people because I don't want to, be hurt myself or go to jail, I'm practical but not really good. Now, Kant also, bringing in God, he also claims, perhaps incorrectly, we intuitively want moral goodness to be linked with happiness. We want, good people to be happy and bad people to not be happy. Because, we have the classic pop philosophy question, why do bad things happen to good people? Because we want good things to happen to good people. So he claims we want that. But it's not true that everyone wants this. There are, of course, thinkers who contend that it shouldn't be about happiness. In fact, being morally good should have no connection to it. But Kant does recognize that intuitively most of us think goodness should be linked to happiness. Now, but when you look at the actual world, we find no necessary connection, or at least according to Kant, between virtue and happiness. We see good people suffering terribly. We hear of them being tortured, beaten, imprisoned, and killed. And we see the wicked, in many places triumph, rise to exalted positions, profit greatly, receive praise, get away with their misdeeds. And so we often see no justice in this world. The virtue go unrewarded, the wicked, thrive. So according to Kant, we do have this intuition. We want good people to be happy and presumably bad people to not be happy. And we don't see it happen here. So he asserts, kind of stealing from our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas, that for this intuition to make sense, there must be a transcendent cause that brings about justice in the future. And the only one up to this task, and he makes quite a leap, very Aquinas-like leap, that it's morally necessary to assume the existence of God, to ensure that the wicked are punished and the good are rewarded. Now, it's important to note that for Kant, morality doesn't depend on God's will. So it's not that you need God to tell people like, okay, it's good because I say so, and bad because I say it's bad. For Kant, morality is both rational and independent of God's will. So he would be an intellectualist. But he believes that God has a critical role to play, namely to fulfill our moral intuition that the wicked must be punished, the just rewarded. And he does believe, he claims, perhaps incorrectly, that morality naturally leads to religion. And so that wraps it up for Kant's, view of morality as categorical imperative And next we'll turn to looking at some problems for Kantian deontology.